My name is Elliot Gray, and I'm sitting here in the dim glow of a lighthouse lantern room, watching the waves crash against the rocky Maine coast below. The salt air cuts through the December night like glass, sharp and unforgiving, but somehow I find comfort in its harshness. It matches the ache in my chest, the constant reminder that some wounds never fully heal. 6 months ago, I was in the Arctic pulling stranded beluga whales from ice floes, my life dedicated to creatures who couldn't save themselves. Now I can barely save myself. The accident replays in my mind like a broken record player, the same scratched melody of failure. The ice shelf cracking beneath my feet with a sound like thunder, the frigid water swallowing me whole, the crushing weight of the floe that took part of my left leg and most of my confidence. They told me I was a hero for getting those whales to safety before the rescue boat pulled me out, but heroes don't wake up screaming when the wind rattles the windows. Heroes don't freeze up when they hear the distant rumble of storm waves against the shore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I came back to Millfield, Maine because it was the only place left to go. Our parents died in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving behind the old Victorian house on Elm Street, where Clara and I grew up catching fireflies in mason jars and building sandcastles that the tide would always claim. Clara had moved back into the house after college, building her career in tourism marketing while I chased whales across the globe. She was practical, rooted, everything I wasn't. When I called her from the hospital in Anchorage, her voice was tight, with obligation rather than relief. "Of course you can stay here until you figure things out," she said, but I heard the unspoken deadline in her words. Living with Clara felt like wearing clothes that no longer fit. Every morning I'd wake to the sound of her heels clicking across the hardwood floors, always rushing somewhere important, while I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee growing cold, staring at job applications for positions I'd never be able to do again. She'd make polite conversation about the weather, or ask if I needed anything from the store, but her eyes would drift to my prosthetic leg, to the way I gripped the table when thunder rolled across the harbor. I became a problem to be managed, a reminder of fragility in her carefully constructed world. The panic attacks started in November. Small things would trigger them. The screech of gulls outside my window, the sound of ice clinking in a glass, even the hiss of the radiator on cold nights. My heart would race like I was drowning all over again, my vision would blur, and I'd have to sit down wherever I was until the world stopped spinning. Clara would hover nearby during these episodes, her face a mask of concern and embarrassment, as if my broken mind was somehow contagious. Christmas Eve arrived like a storm I should have seen coming. Clara had invited her colleagues from the tourism board, polished professionals who spoke in marketing buzzwords and measured success in quarterly reports. I tried to stay in my room, but she insisted I join them for dinner, her smile brittle as winter ice. "It'll be good for you to socialize," she said, straightening the tablecloth with sharp, precise movements that reminded me of how she used to arrange her dolls as a child, everything in its perfect place. The dining room felt suffocating with its forced holiday cheer, red and gold decorations that seemed to mock the hollow feeling in my chest. Clara's friends asked polite questions about my work in conservation, their voices dropping to that careful tone people use when they're not sure if they're talking to someone who's broken. I tried to answer, tried to summon the passion I once felt for the work, but the words came out flat and rehearsed. When thunder rumbled outside, I gripped my water glass so tightly I thought it might shatter, and I saw Clara's jaw tighten with embarrassment. The conversation turned to local business opportunities, ways to capitalize on Maine's natural beauty for tourism. Someone mentioned the old lighthouse on the point, how it was just sitting there unused, except for that crazy old fisherman who kept the light burning. "Such a waste of prime real estate," Clara's boss said, cutting into his ham with deliberate strokes. "Could be turned into a boutique hotel, maybe a wedding venue." I found myself speaking without thinking. "Some things aren't meant to be turned into profit," I said, my voice carrying more edge than I intended. The table went quiet, and Clara's face flushed red. That lighthouse has been guiding ships safely to harbor for over a century. Maybe that's worth more than money. Clara's laugh was sharp and bitter. Easy to say when you're not the one paying the bills, she snapped, her composure finally cracking. Easy to be philosophical about money when you're living off someone else's generosity. The words hung in the air like smoke, and I felt every eye at the table turn away from me. God, Elliot, you're 29 years old, and you're acting like the world owes you something because you got hurt. Well, guess what? We all have problems. We all have to find ways to take care of ourselves instead of being a burden on the people who love us. The word burden hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. I stared at my sister, this woman who had once helped me build blanket forts and told me bedtime stories about brave knights and magical kingdoms, and I saw a stranger wearing her face. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, filled only with the sound of cutlery against china and the distant howl of wind through the eaves. I left that night while Clara and her guests were still finishing dessert, their voices resuming their polite chatter as if my humiliation was just another course to be cleared away. The snowstorm had intensified, turning the world into a blur of white and gray. But I couldn't stay in that house another moment. My leg ached in the cold, the prosthetic joint stiffening with each step, but I pushed forward through the drifts that came up to my knees. I had no destination, only the desperate need to escape the suffocating weight of being unwanted. The coastal road was treacherous, ice forming on the asphalt faster than the town's single plow truck could clear it. I slipped twice, my crutch sliding out from under me, and each fall felt like another confirmation of Clara's words. Maybe I was a burden. Maybe I was fooling myself thinking I could ever be useful again. The wind cut through my jacket like it was made of paper, and I began to understand how people could just lie down in the snow and never get up again. That's when I saw the lighthouse beam cutting through the storm, steady and unwavering despite the chaos around it. The light swept across the harbor in its ancient rhythm, and something about its persistence called to me. I had nowhere else to go, no other shelter from the storm that was both meteorological and metaphorical. My parents' house belonged to Clara now, in every way that mattered. The lighthouse was just a relic, but at least it was a relic that still served a purpose. The path to the lighthouse was barely visible under the snow, winding down from the main road through scrub pines that bent and swayed like dancers in the wind. By the time I reached the base of the structure, my teeth were chattering so hard I could barely speak. The keeper's cottage attached to the lighthouse looked dark except for a single window glowing orange with warmth. I hammered on the door with my fist, too cold and desperate to care about propriety. The man who answered was built like a tree that had weathered decades of storms, all gnarled strength and stubborn resilience. His white beard was streaked with gray, his blue eyes sharp and assessing as they took in my bedraggled state. "You're the gray boy," he said without preamble, his voice rough as barnacles. "Clara's brother. Heard you were back." He stepped aside without another word, gesturing me into the warmth of his kitchen, where a wood stove crackled with life. Jonas Mallory didn't ask questions that first night, just handed me a mug of coffee strong enough to wake the dead and pointed to a couch near the stove. "Storm like this, nobody should be out walking the roads," he said, settling into his own chair with the careful movements of a man whose bones remembered every winter he'd lived through. "You can stay till it blows over." I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling sensation return to my fingers in painful pins and needles. The cottage was small but felt solid, walls lined with maritime charts and photographs of fishing boats battling enormous waves. A ship's chronometer ticked steadily on the mantelpiece, keeping time with the rhythm of the lighthouse beam that swept past the windows every 30 seconds. Everything in the room spoke of a life spent in communion with the sea, and I felt something in my chest begin to uncurl for the first time in months. "Used to run a fishing boat out of Millfield Harbor," Jonas said, following my gaze to a faded photograph of him as a younger man standing beside a lobster boat named Sarah's Dream. 43 years on the water before I retired, Been keeping this light burning for the past 8. He paused, his eyes growing distant. My boy used to help me with the boat. Lost him in a storm off George's Bank 12 years ago. Coast Guard never found him. The simple statement carried the weight of an ocean of grief, and I understood why this man kept a lighthouse operational when the Coast Guard's automated systems had made such personal vigilance unnecessary. I'm sorry, I said, the words feeling inadequate. I know what it's like to lose someone to the water. Jonas nodded slowly. Figured you might. Clara mentioned you worked with marine rescue up north. Heard about what happened to you, too. He didn't offer platitudes or false reassurances, just acknowledgement of shared understanding. Water gives and takes according to its own rules. Doesn't much care what we think about fairness. That night I slept better than I had in months, lulled by the steady rhythm of the lighthouse beam and the sound of waves against rocks. When I woke, Jonas was already up, checking weather instruments and updating a logbook with meticulous handwriting. Snow was still falling, but lighter now, the storm's fury spent. Through the kitchen window, I could see the harbor where a few hardy fishing boats were already heading out for the day's work. The second morning brought a discovery that would change everything. I was helping Jonas check the lighthouse's exterior for storm damage when I heard it. A weak, desperate cry coming from the rocks below. Following the sound, I found a northern gannet tangled in a mass of discarded fishing line, one wing bent at an unnatural angle, its yellow head dulled with exhaustion and pain. The bird was magnificent even in its suffering, built for diving and soaring across vast distances, now reduced to helpless struggling against human-made bonds. My hands moved without conscious thought, muscle memory from years of marine rescues taking over where my rational mind wanted to hesitate. Easy there, I murmured, approaching slowly so as not to spook the bird further. The gannet's dark eyes fixed on me with a mixture of fear and something that might have been hope. Or maybe I was projecting my own desperate need for purpose onto this broken creature. The fishing line had cut deep into the bird's flesh, and I could see infection setting in around the wounds. Jonas appeared beside me with a pair of wire cutters and a heavy canvas jacket. Northern gannets don't usually come this close to shore unless something's wrong, he said, his voice quiet so as not to startle our patient. Must have been driven in by the storm. He helped me wrap the bird carefully, avoiding the sharp beak that could easily take off a finger. I've got some antibiotics left over from when I treated an injured seal last year. Might help with those cuts. Back in the cottage, we set up a makeshift recovery area in Jonas's spare room, using towels and cardboard boxes to create a safe space where the gannet could rest without further injury. I cleaned the wounds with salt water and applied the antibiotics, my hands steady for the first time since the accident. This was work I understood, purpose I could still fulfill despite my limitations. The bird, I found myself thinking of her as female, though I couldn't say why, remained calm throughout the treatment, as if she knew we were trying to help. She's beautiful, I said, watching the way light caught the subtle patterns in her feathers. Look at those wings, built for power and precision. She probably migrates thousands of miles every year, following fish populations across the Atlantic. I felt something stirring in my chest, a familiar passion I thought I'd lost forever. In the wild, she'd be diving from heights of 60 feet or more, hitting the water at speeds that would kill most other birds. They're incredible creatures. Jonas watched me work with thoughtful eyes. You've got the touch for this, he said. Always could tell who had the calling and who was just playing at it. You've got the calling. He paused, considering his words. This old lighthouse sees a lot of injured wildlife wash up on these rocks. Seals, birds, sometimes even whales that get confused by the shallow water. I do what I can, but I'm just an old fisherman. You, though, you know what you're doing. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The gannet, whom I named Aster after the purple flowers that grew wild along the coastal cliffs, became my teacher in ways I never expected. Caring for her required patience, consistency, and a gentle touch that didn't come from textbooks but from something deeper. An understanding that healing couldn't be rushed, that recovery was as much about trust as it was about medicine. Every morning I would check her wounds, change her bandages, and coax her to eat small pieces of fish that Jonas brought from the harbor. For the first week, Esther barely moved, her body conserving energy for the difficult work of healing. But gradually, as infection cleared and torn tissue began to mend, I saw flickers of her wild spirit returning. She would turn her head to follow my movements around the room, and sometimes I caught her flexing her wings, testing their strength. The damaged wing remained weak, but it was healing straight and true. Jonas had given me free run of the cottage, never once suggesting I should contact Clara or make other arrangements. "A man's welcome here as long as he's useful," he said, and I threw myself into making myself useful. I helped maintain the lighthouse equipment, learned the rhythms of the automated systems that kept the beacon operational, and began documenting the wildlife that regularly visited these shores. The work gave structure to my days and purpose to my recovery. On a clear morning in early January, I decided to photograph Astor's progress for my own records. The pictures came out better than I expected, capturing not just her physical healing but something essential about her spirit. The way she held her head high despite her circumstances, the alert intelligence in her dark eyes. On impulse, I posted one of the photos to my dormant Instagram account with a simple caption, "Astor, Day 12 of Recovery." Northern gannet found tangled in fishing line after Christmas storm. Sometimes healing means learning to trust again. I didn't expect much response. My account had been inactive for months, and my followers were mostly fellow conservationists and marine biology students. But something about Astor's story resonated. The post got dozens of likes and comments, people sharing their own stories of wildlife rescue and asking for updates on her progress. For the first time since my accident, I felt connected to something larger than my own small world of pain and self-doubt. "Look at this," I said, showing Jonas the response on my phone. "People care about what we're doing here." He squinted at the screen, not entirely comfortable with technology but interested in spite of himself. "That's good," he said finally. "Story like hers deserves to be told. Might inspire others to pay attention to what's happening along our coasts." By February, Astor was strong enough to move to a larger enclosure Jonas and I built in his workshop, using salvaged materials and creativity born of necessity. The space allowed her to exercise her wings and practice the motion she would need for flight, though we both knew release was still weeks away. I continued documenting her progress, and my posts began attracting attention from wildlife organizations and conservation groups across New England. That's when Sophia Reyes reached out. She was a recent marine biology graduate who had been following Astor's story online, and she offered to help expand the documentation and outreach around our work. "What you're doing is exactly the kind of grassroots conservation effort that makes a real difference," she wrote in her first email. "Would you be interested in setting up a more formal social media presence? I think there are people out there who would love to support this work." Sophia arrived on a cold Saturday morning, driving up from Boston with a car full of camera equipment and infectious enthusiasm. She was younger than me, maybe 25, with dark hair that she kept pulling back into a ponytail, and eyes that lit up when she talked about marine ecosystems. "I've been following your posts since January," she said, kneeling beside Astor's enclosure to get a better shot. "The way you write about her recovery, it's like you understand what she's going through on a deeper level than just the physical healing." Together we created what we called the Millfield Point Wildlife Sanctuary social media presence, documenting not just Astor's story, but the broader ecosystem of the Maine coast. Sophia taught me about lighting and composition, while I shared what I knew about animal behavior and marine biology. Our posts began attracting hundreds, then thousands of followers, people who were hungry for authentic stories about conservation and wildlife rescue. The response was overwhelming in the best possible way. Donations began trickling in through a PayPal account Sophia set up, small amounts from people who wanted to help with veterinary bills and supplies. Local volunteers started showing up, drawn by our online presence and word of mouth in the community. Tom, a retired electrician, helped us improve the lighthouse's wiring. Hannah, a teacher from Millfield Elementary, brought her students for educational visits that became regular weekend programs. Jonas watched this growth with a mixture of amazement and wariness. "Never seen anything like it," he said, observing Sophia as she live-streamed one of Astor's physical therapy sessions. "One bird in a fishing net, and suddenly we've got half the state wanting to help." But I could see pride in his eyes, too. Satisfaction that his lighthouse was becoming something more than just a monument to loss. March brought the first real signs of spring and Astor's first successful flight. We had moved her to an outdoor flight cage Jonas and I constructed from donated materials, giving her space to build up the muscle strength she would need for release. The morning she took her first real flight, not just a hop or a flutter, but actual sustained flight from one perch to another, I felt tears streaming down my face without realizing I was crying. Sophia captured the moment on video, and when we posted it that evening, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages poured in from around the world, people celebrating Astor's progress as if she were their own beloved pet. The video was shared hundreds of times, and donations surged to levels that allowed us to purchase proper veterinary equipment and supplies. But success brought new challenges. The attention our work was receiving had attracted notice from local government officials and tourism boards, including Clara's organization. I hadn't spoken to my sister since Christmas night, though I knew she was aware of what I was doing. Millfield was too small a town for that kind of secret. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter from the town planning office, questioning whether our activities constituted a business that required special permits and zoning approvals. "They're trying to regulate us out of existence," Jonas said, reading over the legal documents with a scowl. 40 years I've been living on this point, and suddenly they care about zoning." He folded the letter with sharp, angry movements. "This isn't about permits. This is about money, about who gets to profit from what we've built here." I knew he was right, and I suspected I knew who was behind the sudden bureaucratic interest in our activities. Clara's tourism board had been looking for ways to develop the coastline for years, and our success had probably reminded them that the lighthouse property represented valuable real estate. "What do we do?" I asked, feeling the familiar weight of helplessness settling over me. Jonas stood up, his jaw set with determination. "We fight," he said simply. "This lighthouse has been guiding people safely home for over 100 years. Seems to me that's exactly what we're still doing, just in a different way." He gestured toward the flight cage where Astor was preening her feathers in the afternoon sun. "Besides, that bird's not ready for release yet, and I suspect she's not the last one who's going to need our help." The confrontation I had been dreading came on a warm April morning when the first tourists of the season were beginning to explore the coastal paths. I was working in the flight cage with Astor, who had grown strong enough to catch fish thrown into her enclosure, when I heard the sound of heels clicking on the rocky path. Clara appeared around the bend, dressed in her professional best, and accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits who looked profoundly out of place against the rugged coastline. "Hello, Elliot," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I think we need to talk." She gestured to her companions. "This is Richard Hayworth from the Maine Tourism Development Authority, and James Chen from Coastal Properties Group. They have a proposition that I think you'll find interesting." I continued working with Astor, not trusting myself to look directly at my sister. "If this is about permits or zoning, we're handling it through proper channels," I said, offering the gannet a piece of mackerel that she snatched with precision. "Our lawyer says we're operating well within guidelines for educational and conservation activities." Richard stepped forward, his smile too wide and too practiced. "Actually, Mr. Gray, we're here with an opportunity. What you've built here is remarkable, truly inspiring. The social media presence, the volunteer community, the educational programs. It's exactly the kind of authentic Maine experience that tourists are looking for." He gestured expansively at the lighthouse and surrounding grounds. "We'd like to help you take it to the next level." "What he means," Clara interjected, "is that we want to invest in what you're doing. Professional management, proper facilities, marketing support that could bring in serious funding. Her eyes were bright, with the kind of excitement she usually reserved for successful quarterly reports. Think about it, Elliot. You could help so many more animals with the right backing. James Chen unrolled a set of architectural drawings on a nearby workbench, revealing plans for a visitor center, gift shop, and expanded parking facilities. The lighthouse would remain the centerpiece, of course, he said, but we'd create a proper wildlife rehabilitation facility, maybe add some interactive exhibits, perhaps a cafe with views of the harbor. He pointed to various features on the plans. We estimate we could increase visitor capacity by 400% within the first year. I felt something cold and hard forming in my stomach as I looked at their vision for my sanctuary. And the animals? I asked. Where do they fit into your visitor capacity projections? Astor had gone still in her enclosure, as if sensing the tension in the air. Oh, they'd be part of the experience, Richard assured me. Controlled viewing opportunities, educational presentations. People love that kind of thing. We'd need to make some adjustments to ensure visitor safety and maximize engagement, but the core mission would remain the same. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a storm breaks. I looked at Clara, really looked at her, and saw not my sister but a stranger wearing a familiar face. The woman who had once helped me rescue injured seagulls on this very beach had been replaced by someone who saw everything, including my pain and recovery, as an opportunity to be monetized and exploited. No, I said quietly, the word carrying more finality than I had ever managed to put into anything in my life. This isn't for sale. It never was, and it never will be. I turned to face them fully, feeling stronger and more certain than I had since my accident. What we've built here isn't a business or a tourist attraction. It's a sanctuary. For the animals, yes, but for the people who volunteer here too. For Jonas, who found a way to honor his son's memory. For Sophia, who discovered her calling in conservation work. For me, who learned that healing sometimes means helping something even more broken than yourself. Clara's professional composure cracked, revealing the frustration and resentment she had been carrying for months. God, Elliot, you're so stubborn. This is exactly what I was talking about at Christmas. You can't see beyond your own narrow view of how things should be. Her voice rose, causing Astor to flutter nervously in her enclosure. You have a chance to create something significant, something that could actually make money and help animals on a larger scale, and you're going to throw it away because of some romantic notion about keeping things pure. Quote, What I see, I said, moving protectively closer to Astor's enclosure, is people who want to turn something sacred into something profitable. You want to put injured wildlife on display for entertainment. You want to turn Jonas's grief into a marketing tool. You want to package my recovery and sell it to tourists looking for an authentic Maine experience. I shook my head, feeling years of accumulated hurt and disappointment crystallizing into clarity. The answer is no. The answer will always be no. Richard and James exchanged glances, their business masks slipping slightly to reveal irritation at this unexpected resistance. Mr. Gray, Richard said, his tone turning cooler, I think you should understand that development along this coastline is going to happen whether you participate or not. We're offering you a chance to be part of the solution, to maintain some control over how your work is presented. Without our support, you might find it very difficult to continue operating here at all. The threat was barely veiled, but I had faced down polar bears in the Arctic and survived the collapse of an ice shelf. I wasn't going to be intimidated by men in expensive suits who had never risked anything more dangerous than a bad quarterly report. Then I guess we'll find out how much fight this old lighthouse has left in it, I said. But we'll do it on our own terms, as we always have. Clara stared at me for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. Finally, she shook her head with something that might have been sadness or might have been pity. You haven't changed at all, she said. Still the same stubborn idealist who thinks the world owes him something just because he means well. She turned to follow her companions back up the path, then paused. When this all falls apart, and it will, Elliot, don't come crying to me for help. I'm done being your safety net. As they disappeared around the bend, I felt something in my chest both break and heal at the same time. The sister I had grown up with was truly gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. But in losing her, I had found something else, a family of choice built around shared purpose and genuine care, a community that valued the work itself more than the profit it might generate. Jonas emerged from the cottage where he had been watching the confrontation through the window. "Well," he said, settling his weathered cap more firmly on his head, "looks like we've got ourselves a fight." He smiled, and I saw steel in his blue eyes. "Good thing we've got right on our side. And good thing that bird of yours is almost ready to fly. Something tells me we're going to need all the inspiration we can get." Aster called from her enclosure, a sound like wind across water, and I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together, this makeshift family of broken souls who had found healing in helping others heal. The lighthouse beam swept across the harbor, as it had for over a century, steady and unwavering, guiding travelers safely home through whatever storms might come. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.